Is that on? You can hear me? Okay, good morning everybody and welcome back to our first, this is our first of the year members meeting, and we're lucky enough today to have Chuck Miller. His son is coming in right now, Mark, and Bill Mitchell are going to tell us a little bit about the history of the Masons.
We're going to lean on Jim a little too here.
And we're hoping we have more Masons around that can help out. Anyway, Chuck is going to explain about the history of the Masons, and then all of this stuff is what we have at the museum of the, and we have some more too, of things that have been donated. It has always been upstairs. I don't know that everybody has been able to see it or not. But anyway, Bill, afterwards, will talk a little bit about the Earlville Masonic Lodge. Right now, we have Chuck Miller. I'm going to let him introduce himself because he knows more about himself than I do. Bill can do it if he wants, and Chuck can introduce them. And in fact, all three of you, why don't you come up and Chuck can start and tell a little bit about each of you, and then we'll start with the.
Well, I guess this is on now.
Oh.
I'm Chuck Miller.
Yeah, turn that one off.
Been a member of Leland Lodge for 61 years. When I joined in 1963, my uncle was secretary. And he said, when I got my third degree, he says, when you get out of the East, you're going to be secretary. Little did I know 40 years later, I would still be secretary. It's an easy job to get, and Jim has been secretary of Sandwich Lodge for a long time. It's the easiest job in the lodge to get and the hardest one to get rid of, because nobody wants the job of secretary. But Bill's going to do a little talking about Earlville Lodge, who joined with us about, what, 20 years ago, Bill? 05? Well, we'll be 20 pretty quick. And now we are joining in the process of joining with Meteor Lodge in Sandwich. As soon as the paperwork gets done and they come and get our charter, we will be officially members. As of yet, we're still members of Leland Lodge. But in the coming months, when they get the paperwork done, the Grand Lodge gets the paperwork, and they get our charter, then we'll be Meteor Lodge 283, right? They get the right number?
That's right.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Bill. He's going to talk about Earlville Lodge.
Oh, I thought we'd do that last.
Oh, okay. That makes no difference to me.
Please.
She's already introduced both Mark and Bill. Bill's our treasurer this year, has been for many years, and Mark's a master. So I guess we got to call them Worshipful brothers, Miller and Mitchell. When after your master, you become a worshipful brother instead of just a brother. So Masonry has a lot of symbols, as you'll find out through our talk. Well, we should thank the Earlville bunch for doing this power presentation. Anna's worked real hard on this, and we just thank her a lot for doing this, and we're happy to be coming, be able to talk about Masonry. Come on up here, April, you can come up here.
Sorry.
This is my daughter-in-law and granddaughter here.
Just watch this. And I'll move it. I can move that.
We'll get them up here in front so she can see.
You want them all the way in? Okay, go. Okay. Just watch this. Sorry.
Hi there. As I said, Masonry has a lot of symbolism, and you don't really think about this when you're using some of these things, but I know I can look back and I've had Dave tell him about all the woodworking he does. You use a level. A lot of people use a lever, we never think about it, but that's a symbol in Masonry. A square, that's a symbol in Masonry. We'll talk more about the symbol of the square. We'll show you how it has to do with the jewels and all. And a lot of our Masonic jewels are just emblems. And a lot of, like I say, Masonry has a lot of symbolism. It goes way back to biblical days. If you want to look it up, it starts with the building of King Solomon's temple, and you can read about that in 1 Kings chapter 5 in your Bible. It tells all about the building of King Solomon's temple. So it's like they say, it started way back in those days. Solomon was the third king of Israel, and he was King David's son. And if you know anything about the Bible, King David wanted to build the temple, but God wouldn't let him. He said, your son will be able to build it, but you won't. And so Solomon was a good friend of Hiram, king of Tyre, who furnished the lumber for the temple from the forests of Lebanon. And I found this is interesting. He made annual payments of 100,000 bushels of wheat and 110,000 gallons of olive oil to pay for the lumber annually, the lumber that they were getting to build the temple. So from that point, masonry kind of took off, and it just expanded from there. And it's been said that it was practiced throughout England, and it said that a lot of the crusaders that were in the Crusades were actually master masons. And masonry was brought over to the United States by the English settlers that came from England. And a lot of them started their own little lodges around, but they still kept in contact with their home lodges in England. The first mason that is mentioned in the Bible is Hiram Abiff, who was the grand architect of the building of King Solomon's temple. And he was a member of the tribe of Naphtali. Also, I think that she has a slide there of the presidents. I think there's 13 to 17 signers of the Declaration of Independence that were Master Masons. And some of them that I found were George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Hancock, Paul Revere, and John Adams. That was a few. And there were some Masons, actors, who were Masons too. And I found just 3 of them, but Roy Rogers was one, John Wayne was one, and Red Skelton was also a Master Mason. And I can tell you a little funny story about Roy Rogers. My great aunt lived in Portsmouth, Ohio, most of her life. She was a registered nurse. And she retired the early part of the 50s, so my dad and mom and my aunt went out to pick her up and brought her back to Leland to live with my grandmother. And of course my brother and I would watch every Saturday morning. There were cowboy shows on. Roy Rogers was a cowboy. And she came over one day and she said, that's not his name. I said, what do you mean? He's Roy Rogers. You know, I'm about 11 and I said, my brother's about 7 or 8. What do you mean that isn't his name? No, she said his name is John Sly. She said his mother lived in Portsmouth, Ohio, and she didn't, I don't remember whether she said his dad had died or they'd been separated. He used to go by my house with a little red wagon. His mother did his washings, and she said, I know John Sly. So that just killed us, you know. Roy Rogers, he isn't Roy Rogers, he's John Sly. And there's also some athletes too, Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, Honus Wagner, and one other one that I knew myself, Dizzy Trout. Did anybody know about Dizzy Trout? He played for the Tigers, the Detroit Tigers in the 40s and the early 50s. And in 45 they played the Cubs in the World Series and they beat the Cubs, sad to say, me being a Cub fan. But my brother's first father-in-law had played professional baseball and he knew Dizzy. And Dizzy used to come down to Coal City where my brother lives and fish and hunt because he just loved to fish and hunt. And I was talking to him one day and he says, well, you know, I'm a Mason. I said, really? You're a Mason? He says, my 45 World Series ring I had made into a Masonic square and compass and G with the little diamonds that they had around there. And he showed me his ring. It was pretty impressive to know that a lot of the athletes also are. And he said, a lot of ball players are Masons. So he didn't name any, of course, but there was quite a few of them. And supposedly 15 of our presidents have also been Master Masons, and 2 that we would remember is Lyndon Johnson and Gerald Ford. Of course, George Washington was the first most excellent Grand Master of Masons in the United States. And if you've ever been to Washington, D.C., you'll see the Washington Monument. That was built in honor of George Washington, and I think, I'm not sure, but I'm sure the Masons had something to do with the building of it. And at one time when I was still secretary, we donated, I think it was $5 for every one we raised. Did you do that too, Bill? There was so much went to the Masonic Fund to go to.
Everybody does, everybody else does.
Do they, Jim? Yeah. Well, yeah, Jim would know too, yeah. I think it was $5, wasn't it, Jim, that you donated to the Grand Lodge of Illinois, and then went back. The beliefs of Freemasonry, and listen, anytime you have a question, just stop us. And between the 4 of us here, I think we maybe can answer your questions, hopefully. You must be an adult male. You must believe in the existence of a supreme being and the immortality of the soul. And some of the teachings of Masonry are that morality, charity, obedience to the law of the land. Masonic symbols are the square and compass with a G inside, they're joined. And to signify that was 2 of the principal tools used in the building of the King Solomon's Temple.
And what does a G mean?
The G stands for two different things. We won't directly come out in our work and say it's God, but we say it's geometry. And we never mention God, we mention a supreme being in Masonry. Thank you for that question. It's never mentioned that I know of, unless it's some appended body, and I don't know. Jim, do you know that? No, God is never mentioned. It's the supreme being.
Right, they always use the geometry because it's used with
it's the
the
basis.
building of the temples and
Right.
so on with the square and the line.
Yeah, but I've never heard it mentioned in any of our rituals.
No.
The purpose, Freemasonry is fundamentally a self-improvement volunteer association that teaches moral and intellectual and spiritual lessons through initiation ceremonies. And we have 3 degrees, and they're modeled after the craftsman progress through the steps in Masonry. I'm going to have Bill come over here. He's got a white apron on. The lodge will furnish everybody a white apron when we have to wear these when we're in lodge. Okay, when you get your first degree, we call it the entered apprentice degree, they wear their aprons with the bib turned up. And the reason is that entered apprentices are bearers of burden. And they say that you should wear your bib turned up to prevent soiling your clothing. So then when you pass on to the degree of fellowcraft, the bib is turned down and the left corner is turned up in the form of a triangle to serve as a receptacle for their working tools, which are the square, palm, and level. And then as a master mason, you turn the left corner down in the form of a square, because that in masonry is called a perfect figure. So as a master mason, that means you are overseers of the work and you're one of the bosses, and this is a perfect square. Thank you, sir.
Anytime.
Your time's coming, Bill. In simple terms, Freemasonry is an organization of men who believe in brotherhood and helping others. Its members are known as Freemasons. Now, when I became a member in '63, I don't know, there was much said about it. I come from quite a line of Masons. Both my grandfathers belonged, my mom's dad and my dad's dad were Masons. And my dad was a Mason. My mother was an Eastern Star. And on mom's side, her brother was a Mason, and he had 2 sons that were twins, and they were Masons. And they both had sons, and they're Masons. They're the last of the generation left. We have some cousins, some of Mark's and my cousins. And then on my dad's side, his brother-in-law was also, I mentioned Harold Seville, he was the secretary, and he had a son who was a Mason, and then he had a son, Fred Seville, who is a Mason now. So it's kind of ingrained in our family. And then, as Bill will probably mention, Eastern Star. Eastern Star, you have to be related to a Mason to belong to the Eastern Star. And there was a lot of Eastern Star people on mother's side of the family. Her sister was, like Bill's grandmother, a grand lecturer, which means they had gone to school and studied and learned all the work of the Eastern Star, and then they would be able to go and teach. And I don't know how many years I sat in the East, but I could learn Masonry, but I couldn't learn Eastern Star. It just didn't click with me. We had a lady that came down from DeKalb, and her husband was really involved in the Masons, and she'd say, "He says you learn all the stuff in Masons." I said, "Well, you women make me nervous. I just can't. Why don't you run your own organization?" I said, "We don't want women in the Masons. Why do you have to have us in the Star?" But did you ever belong to Star, Bill?
No.
No, you didn't. How come
Can join.
How come you didn't? Your grandma didn't get you in the Star? Oh boy. Anyway, yeah.
I
Truly wanted to know, why is it called the Eastern Star?
That's a good question. How about any of you Star members? Like I said, I went to Eastern Star because my wife was in it, and my grandmother and my mother and my aunt and all them everybody belonged. But I suppose it has something to do with the Star of Bethlehem. I'm guessing. I don't know. But these are all symbols of different things. There's the cup of wine and the wheat and the sheaf, and it was all part of the Mason or Eastern Star stuff. And as I say, I never got involved in that. That was always a ladies' organization. And I finally took a job sitting outside the door, which we have a Tyler in Lodge, and they have a, what the heck do they call it? Sentinel.
Actually, we didn't know much on the Eastern Star. We were
No.
hoping that we would get some people who belong there to help us out on that. So we didn't do a lot of research on the Eastern Star. And I knew they didn't know a lot, but wanted to tell you how
Yeah.
they became an Eastern Star.
Right,
That way.
yeah, you had to be,
How do you become an Eastern?
you had to be related to a Mason. You either married a Mason, or your dad was a Mason, or your uncle was a Mason, or your grandfather was a Mason, but you had to be related through the Masonic organization to become an Eastern Star member. And I don't know now, Jim, when you joined, I'm sure it was like that, I don't know, with Bill, you didn't go and ask somebody to be a Mason. In the old days, Masonry was very secretive, and I think that's caused a lot of our problems to this day. Nobody wanted you to know anything about it. Most lodges always went upstairs because they didn't want anybody knowing what they were doing. And it was very secretive, and it was just kind of a few people. You had to know somebody to get involved in it. You didn't go and ask, like I say. When I joined, when I turned 21, the day I was 21, there was a petition on the kitchen table. Dad said, fill it out, and so you went through the process. You filled out an application to a petition to join the lodge, and I've got some up here you can look at. You had to fill this petition out, and then it was taken back to lodge, and it was read in lodge, and then the worshipful master would appoint a committee of 3. They called it an investigating committee, and they would come and talk to you about lodge, and ask you questions and different things, and then they would go back and report to the master, favorable or unfavorable, and then they voted on you. And I have here, this is what we call our ballot box, and there's white marbles and black cubes. And everybody got a chance. It was at lodge that night if he was a master mason. Well, he had to be a master mason to be there. You voted on this, and if you voted white, the white balls elect and black cubes reject. And if you had a black cube, and I have never seen it done in our lodge, but I understand back years ago there were some guys that tried to join, and they were just a little unsavory characters, as they said, and they did blackball some of them. But if there was a good reason to blackball them, okay. But then I've also heard that they knew who the guy was that was blackballing them, and they'd wait until he wasn't at a meeting, and then they'd run this guy through if they wanted to really get somebody through. There was ways to get around this.
Yeah, Chuck, you might mention that, one of the qualifications of the Mason is it has to be a man of good character.
Exactly.
And therefore, if they didn't feel that the man was of good character, they
Right.
didn't vote him in the lodge.
Exactly, yeah. There were some back in the old days, they tell me, that were rejected. I had two. Had you? Yeah, two? Yeah. We've never had one that I remember in our lodge, but there was times, I guess, when it was done. So anyway, then if you were elected to membership, then you came and took your first degree, what we call the under apprentice that Bill was showing you with the bib turned up. And then the master would either appoint somebody to help you learn what we call catechism. There was certain ritual you had to learn in order to advance to the next degree. And when you learned that, you went back at open lodge and were questioned. The guy that posted you would ask you questions, and you would reply back to him. And if it was satisfactory, then you were allowed to advance to the next degree. And it was the same thing. You had to learn a certain amount of catechism, and when you learned that, then you went and were examined, what they call examined in open lodge for the rest of the brethren, and you answered the questions, and then you moved on. It all depended on the master. Now, I didn't know this till later on. If the master said it was okay, if the guy only answered one question, and he thought the guy was okay, he could say it's okay. And nobody could question that. The master's word is it. You could, as I say, I went to one. I had a good friend in Shabnon, and he wanted to be a Mason in the worst way, and he was getting on in years, and he couldn't learn. And I went to his second degree, and the fellow stood right up there. He answered the first question, and the guy stood beside him, and he answered all the rest of them. The master said, I declared the examination satisfactory, and he pretty near cried. He was so excited about being a Mason, but he just couldn't learn. And we had, Jim probably remembers, Lester Story was a grand lecturer. He was the nicest man you ever saw, and he lived in Shabnon. And he was the same way. He had a fellow that was a carpenter up there, and this guy could not learn, but he just wanted to be a Mason in the worst way. And Lester told him, he said, I could never build a house, but you can. He says, but you can't learn masonry, but I can, so let's call us even. He says, if you want to be a Mason, there's no reason you can't be. So he was really a nice guy. Like I say, if you didn't know Lester, you missed a lot. So then you took your third degree, and after that, you were what we call a Master Mason. The Masonic way of life that we promote is kindness in the home, honesty in business, courtesy in society, fairness in works, piety and concern for the unfortunate, resistance toward evil, help for the weak, forgiveness for the penitent, love for one another, and above all, reverence and love for God. And I was looking on Google, and they say we have about 875,000 members in the United States, Master Masons. Each state has their own Grand Lodge. Ours is in Springfield, and the officers are pretty much the same as a lodge. You have your Grand Master, you have your Assistant Grand Master, you have your Secretary and Treasurer, and your Deacons and your Wardens, and your Marshal and your Tyler. If you would like to be Grand Master, you better have some money and you better have some time, because you're going to be talking about 12 years to get to be Grand Master. You start as Junior Grand Warden, or Junior Grand Deacon, for 2 years, and our Grand Master serves for 2 years. And then you move from 2 years to Senior Grand Deacon, then you move to Junior Grand Warden, then you move to Senior Grand Warden, and then you move to Assistant Grand Master and Master. And you travel the length and breadth of the state, from top to bottom, from side to side. If there's a Masonic doing and they call you, you are bound by being a Grand Lodge officer, and the officers have to go too. And so if you have a Grand Lodge doings, you're mad, all your fellows will be there. And the only thing that I know of, Jim would know more about this than I do. I think the Master is, do the rest of them have credit cards? Do they all have credit cards, Jim?
Yeah.
They do? All the Grand Lodge officers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well they do have, they're paid for their gas, but that's it. They get no salary.
No.
The only one that gets paid is the Grand Secretary, because he has many people.
And the Grand Treasurer.
Oh, the Grand, yeah, right, because they have people in their offices.
How is it funded?
We pay per capita, what we call per capita. You're charged so much per head for all your members. Grand Lodge charge you, used to be $5 a head.
15 now.
It's 15 now. You pay, if you have, okay, say if you have 50 members, you pay $15 a head to the Grand Lodge, and that helps defray expenses. And I can't tell you right now how many lodges there are in the state, but the state, the Grand Lodge is pretty well to do. They don't want to tell us what all they've got. We found out at one time, a very good friend of ours, well, I don't know if anybody know Norman Larson? Norman was really involved in Masonry, and he was what we call District Deputy Grand Master. And he had an area of about 14 lodges that he went and visited. Every year he had to make an annual visit, go through the books with the Secretary and Treasurer, and then report back to the Grand Lodge. He was kind of the go-between between the Grand Lodge and our little lodges. Norman got to be real good friends with a fellow by the name of Wayne Blair, who ended up being one of our Grand Masters. And Wayne told Norman, he says, when I get to be Grand Master, I'm going to publish what the Grand Lodge has. And come to find out, they had several farms, and nobody knew about it. And boy, I tell you, there was a real uproar. And Wayne got into trouble. He says, I don't care. I don't care whether they like me or they don't like me. I'm going to make it public, because you guys are paying the way for us. He said, you should know what we've got. And it was really quite a deal. Jim and Bill remember that. Wayne was in big trouble with the rest of his guys, but and to my knowledge, he's still alive. As far as I know, I haven't heard that Wayne died.
He was Grand Master when he put me on the Grand Lodge Advisory
That's right.
Committee.
Jim served on a Grand Lodge committee for years. Wayne went with us one time. Pete Farley belonged in our lodge, and he had moved out to Orion, Illinois, which is almost to Iowa, and they were having a third degree. So Pete called Norman and he said, do you suppose you could get Wayne to come out? Wayne was Grand Master at the time. And we went out in Frank Seville's 10-passenger van. Mark was along. And we went out and put on a third degree. And those guys were going, oh man, these guys got the Grand Master with them. He came out and Wayne did a lot of the work. They were just in awe of the fact. And Wayne was just the nicest guy in the world. But you better watch your P's and Q's. You didn't have our outlaw books, as we call them. Now the Grand Lodge publishes all this stuff. It used to be you had to learn word of mouth. Nobody said they had books, but we know they had. We called them outlaw books. They were coded books. You had to know what you were doing in order to know it. But a lot of them had the old books. But now they published it. But yeah, these guys, they were just flabbergasted that we'd bring the Grand Master. He would take time to come out there. And Wayne was just, like I said, the nicest guy in the world. But when he was instructing, you better not have a book out. Or he'd walk right over to you and he'd put out his hand and he'd say, give me your book. And he'd tear it up right in front of you. He said, you don't wear those, you don't have those books out. He said, you either know it or you don't know it. Don't come to a learning session with your books, he said, because I'll get rid of them. And our guys, we had some 4 or 5 young guys. Yeah, you go ahead and tell them, Mark.
when I came in, it was kind of a renaissance for our lodge. There'd been a number of years where they really hadn't done anything, had any new members. And I was, here, let me show you.
He's fine as long as you stay away from each other.
Yeah, stay away from it. So we had a whole new generation come in. I was the first one to come in as his son, Frank Seville's son came in, Fred. We brought in a couple other guys. So 4 of us being brand new had Wayne come and help us learn all this stuff. And he came every month after a meeting, and we'd stay and we'd work for an hour or more working on everything to get a letter perfect. And it's all memorization. And at one point, he thought we'd done well enough, and we went to DeKalb to what they had was
It's a standard, well, it's a school.
It was a school. So they had one guy that would come and run the whole thing from the east as the master, and then they'd have people in the chairs to do all the work. Well, the 4 of us being the main officers that did it letter perfect, to where the instructor never had to do anything or say anything to the people that were there to learn. And he was amazed, and he's like, where did you guys learn all this stuff? I said, well, we had Wayne Blair come and teach us for months and months.
He came from Morris too, to help you guys.
Yes.
Just hold on to that, Mark.
Yeah, and Wayne told him, he said, look, I will come up from Morris to help you, but you got to learn your ritual. Learn the ritual and I'll teach you the rest of it. Yes?
Chuck, can you explain a little bit about, you're always talking about directions, the east, the north, and it. Can you talk a
Okay.
little bit about that? With
Okay,
the,
yeah, okay. This goes back to some ritual. King Solomon's temple was situated due east and west. And the reason was to perpetuate the remembrance of the mighty east wind by which our miraculous deliverance was wrought. And so when they crossed the the Red Sea, the wind blew from the east. And so they decided that his temple would be set up due east and west to perpetuate that remembrance. And they tried. Now this building could be a perfect lodge hall because the east would be up there, the west would be back here, and then your north and south. We don't have north, but the Eastern Star does. So there's nothing here. If you were an Eastern Star, there would be a chair there. And there's the significance of that to the Eastern Star that I don't know. But our 3 main officers, Worshipful Master, Senior, and Junior Wardens, sit in chairs on a dais. The Junior Warden's dais is only 1 step. The Senior Warden's is 2 steps. And the Master's is 3 steps to designate their importance in the lodge. They've got the altar there. There's an altar there. And on the right side of the altar, as you're facing the east, there's a stand with 3 lights. And they represent the sun, moon, and master of the lodge. And there's always illuminated on the altar. The Bible right here at the end of the table is the one we have on our Bible, on our altar. And then you have the square and compass open, and you open it in the middle and put the square and compass on there before you start your meeting. Every meeting is started with a prayer from the chaplain, who sits to the left of the Worshipful Master, the chaplain right there. And of course the others you can see the secretary is to the left of the Worshipful Master, the treasurer is to the right. The senior deacon sits to the right of the Worshipful Master. You go to the junior deacon on the right of the senior warden, and the marshal is to the left of the senior warden. The 2 stewards are on the right and left of the junior warden. And then there's a Tyler that sits outside the door, and we'll talk about that a little later. Any other questions? Don't wait, because if you're like me, you probably forget them by the time we get to it. The significance of the apron, we kind of talked about them. Okay, what do you guys want to come over and help? Just hold those rules up. The first one. Okay, well, I've got that. We'll do that in a little bit.
Oh, okay.
This is the master. Where's the square? Everybody has a jewel. There's 12 officers in the lodge, and each one has a jewel, and they hold an office. The senior warden is the level. The junior warden is the plumb. Well, let's get the treasurer and secretary. The treasurer is the crossed keys, and the secretary is the crossed pens, and they're self-explanatory. The chaplain's is the open Bible, and then we go to the deacons, and theirs is the rising sun on the senior deacon and the setting sun of the junior deacon. And the 2 stewards are the horn of plenty. The marshal has a baton. Okay. And then this is his baton that he carries if he leads in any processions when you're like in a parade or something, they kind of do that. And then the Tyler is the sword, and they brought down a sword here from the Knights Templar. We had a guy who used to love to be Tyler, and he'd sit outside the door. And when you go to the door to open it, here he'd be standing with this great big sword standing right, he'd be holding it right up in front of his face, a big grin on his face. This sword. Anybody knew Joe Kinney? Joe was the guy that did it. He got a big charge out of that. I've been asked several times, is Masonry a religion? No, it is not a religion. Any adult male, as I said before, who belongs in a supreme being and the immortality of the soul may join. And we have men of all religions. We have Methodists, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Catholics, Baptists, Congregationalists. We open and close our meetings, as I said, with prayer before and after, and we meet brothers on the level. Excuse me. We act by the plumb and part upon the square. Another question I've been asked, and there's a fez here that was one of the Earlville members donated to the lodge.
Albert Strong.
Are all Mason Shriners? No. But you have to be a Mason to be a Shriner. You have to belong to the 3 degrees. And if you don't belong to the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degrees in Masonry, which everybody, Jim's belongs to an independent body, but the other 3 of us don't. You have to belong to, have membership in the Blue Lodge in order to maintain your membership in the shrine, in any of the independent bodies, or they'll kick you out if you don't. You must be a Mason to become a Shriner, and if you lose your membership, you're kicked out. There's 33 degrees in Masonry, and it just depends on how bad you want to go, how far you want to go, how much time you want to spend, how much traveling you want to do. I'm not sure. I think we always went to Freeport and Rockford. Now,
And there's one in Chicago too.
yeah, well, you know, where they have the gambling place now, that was the old Shriners Temple in downtown Chicago.
Medina Temple, yeah.
Yeah, that was Medina Temple for years. I don't know. How many degrees were you taking, Jim?
I just take the 13.
13, okay, so,
I'm on York Rite, so I'm on the command.
Okay.
There's
Jim belongs to
13 degrees on York Rite, there's 32 in the Scottish Rite, which you think would be backwards, you know, you think Scottish Rite would be cheaper, would be only 13 degrees. And the York Rite would be the other way, but it's, yeah, Scottish and York Rite is just opposite.
I know nothing about that. I never had time or the ambition to go. In fact, I had a fella, we used to go a lot to these meetings where you learn stuff. And he told me, he said, if I could come and study with him for 6 months, he said, you could be a grand lecturer. Well, when you get to be a grand lecturer, you know all the work, and you're able to go and teach it. I said, yeah, I could probably have my commission, but I'd have a divorce too, because I got a wife and 2 little boys at home. And if I'm going, when you get to be a grand lecturer, you get called a lot. We have some guys, thank goodness, they're both bachelors, and they come, and if it wasn't for them, I think a lot of our lodges would be closed up by now. But they are really good. They're both, well, one's a certified lodge instructor, and the other one's a grand lecturer. And they are very good, and they're very helpful. Like I say, I don't know what we'd do without them, because we really depend on them. A lot of times we'll say, what night are you guys available? And then we'll set up a degree, because we have to have them to have it.
The thing of it is, all those guys, you have to memorize all of your ritual. You don't read anything out of the book. There's
Exactly.
a lot of ritual to remember, and you have to memorize.
Oh, yes. Yes, you have to take a test. It's just like going to school. You learn this, and then you go before the Board of Grand Examiners, is what they call it. And they are already grand lecturers. And you have to go, and you have to do everything perfect, or you don't pass, and you've got to come back and do it again. And I don't know how long it's taken Jim to do it, but...
He's just a certified, I don't think he's
Well,
ever
Jim-
going to do it. John is, but
yeah, John is a grand lecturer.
I don't think Jim ever will.
No, but he's able to do a lot of stuff too.
He can do
I think
almost anything John can.
a couple of lectures is all that Jim has never learned.
Yeah.
And they can be real hard too, believe me. Well, we're very lucky here, probably close to 20 years ago. Dave Farley, I imagine a lot of people remember Dave, gave us a stipend of $50,000 for scholarships to be used for the seniors in Earlville and in Leland. And we have a board now that will take care of it. When we join Sandwich, we still have our own board that will take care of this money. And we invested it, and invested at the right time, and I think we have more than we started with. I think now the board has decided you're going to go to $2,000 a year instead of $1,000, Mark?
Well, we're going to talk about it. We'd like to, because as we get smaller and smaller and time goes by, there's not going to be a lot of us alive left to give out this money if it's going to stay forever. So we don't want to pass it on to a school, which will just use it for whatever purposes they want to, so we're kind of hoping that we can use it a little bit more, and as expenses get a little more for the kids, 2,000 is really not going to go very far, but we're going to try and do what we can for them. We also have a continuing education fund as well, so if they get the scholarship, if they win the scholarship, then they can come back to us for extra money for the rest of their time at school as well. But we do make them come back for it. They have to ask us, so we don't just give it to them, like, if you want it, you got to come ask.
And Grand Lodge, they even mentioned some of the funds too.
Yep, Grand Lodge is given 2012, yes.
I just want to say personally, anybody that knows Chuck Jenkins, his dad was a 33-degree Mason.
Really?
In Knoxville, Tennessee. So that's why it was so important for him to be with me.
That's an accomplishment in itself. You gotta have a lot of time and a lot of money to get to a
So
33rd.
he asked me yesterday if I could give it
Thank you.
up here, and I said, no, that's
Yeah.
not at home.
Yeah, I remember going to lodge with Chuck. I used to come over to Earlville a lot. In fact, I was here for your last meeting.
Chuck was the last master.
Really? Was he?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And that
Well,
was
see,
in
now we got
2005,
To that, yep.
when they merged with Leland.
Yeah.
When Earl merged with
So
them.
now, when paperwork gets done, there'll be Earlville, Leland, Somonauk, and Sandwich. 4 lodges into one. We'll be meeting. Thank goodness for these guys in Sandwich. We lost our building. If you've been over in Earlville-Leland, the one building that burned, we were the next building to the east of where the store that burned. Upstairs over Kenny Von Olen's drugstore, and we were there for over 100 years. Kenny died, and the lady that bought the building couldn't make the payments. The bank came to us. We had a 25-year lease, and they couldn't break it.
Kenny was a Mason.
Well, Kenny, no, I'm a Mason, yes. He was a past master, and they could not break this lease. So the bank came to us and they said, hey, we got to have some help here. We got this building in our hands, and we don't know what to do with it. You guys got a 25-year lease for $120 a year. Kenny charged us $10 a month for rent. And he said, we can't do it. So we gave up and we moved to another building. And we moved downstairs in that building. And one night we were having lodge, and it was a room that's probably about from maybe here back to the back, if that much. And it was cold. And Jim came over and he walked in. And Norman Larson, he said something about, would you like to come to Sandwich? And Norman said, yes. He says, I don't mind coming to lodge, but I don't have to keep my coat on all the time. He says, I'm freezing to death. So we moved over, thank goodness for Sandwich. They came over and graciously accepted giving us a chance to come over there, and that kept our lodge going for another few years. But like I say, now we'll probably be members of Meteor Lodge. Are there any other questions that you would like to know about?
You might
That-
mention, Chuck, you might mention of all the charities that the Masons do.
Well, yeah, there's the Shriners Hospitals, of course.
And there's 7 burn hospitals throughout the United States. And there's other hospitals that work like the Shriners Hospitals, work with children and that. We get, throughout the United States, we give away about $3 million a day. That's all the lodges combined.
Yeah. That's, yeah, throughout the whole United States. This, I don't know. We were never had. DMOA is the children, it's the young people's organization. What they started with was, I think the purpose of it was to try to get, see, it used to be you had to be 21 to join. And then they moved it back to 18. Now you only have to be 18 to join. And I think that was a reason for starting this, is because they thought maybe these young guys that get started in this, they'd get their feet wet a little bit, know what it was all about, and then they continue on. But I don't know of any Demo Lake chap. Is there one in Ottawa maybe?
There's one in Ottawa, and I think that's the closest one around. Jim and John were DMOA.
Oh, were they?
Yeah, yeah, we had one in Sandwich.
Yeah, I know you did.
A few years, but they started infighting, and that kind of blew that. Of course, there's also the Joe's daughter.
Rusty Pratt had both of them going. DMLA and Joe.
Now this is a copy of their charter.
This is where we can start talking about what we know about the Earlville, history of the Earlville Masonics now. Thank you, Chuck.
Well, and we're gonna do some more. Bill's gonna have a chance
You can help Bill now.
No, that's right.
Gotta yell, because, you know, some of us are older.
Yeah, well, am I loud enough? Some of this stuff was from Dad. I kept after he passed away. There's one from the 100 years in 1955, and they had all the officers, and Anna's father-in-law, he was a Mason, and then there were several other ones. And then we got, for life members, when we closed up and merged with Leland, we paid life memberships for all the members that were in the lodge at the time. And then here we have a list of this, and then we got a copy of the minute book here, and then I found this, it was all the correspondence in the late 50s and early 60s. I think it must have been what the secretary was sending to Grand Lodge, and we got that up here. And then there's a picture of the Earlville leader of all the officers when they had the centennial for the Masonic Lodge in Earlville. And it was called Meridian Lodge 183. We're one of the oldest lodges at the time, so we started at 1, and then so we were 183rd Lodge and was formed in Illinois.
It was first organized in 1840, and it was incorporated in 1955. That's 8 years before Earlville was incorporated again.
And the Eastern Star, they merged with Harding, I think. And then I think they went to Otto or Marseilles then.
Marseilles, I know Harding went to Otto, to Marseilles.
Okay. So
So
that's
Harding
right.
went to Marseilles. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's right. Well, there's Mason back there. Yes.
Was your building out there where the junkyard is?
Yep, behind Wes's office. We started meeting, we were meeting above, Mars Barber Shop first, or,
Okay, you want me to
You-
tell you the
yeah,
first
you read 'em
location?
off.
All right, the first location, we cannot even find where the first locations before about 1868, when Earlville became incorporated. We found out that they were meeting on like the Khalil buildings right here. Someone donated, in fact, I don't know who donated that one, the funds to build that into a Masonic temple. And from what we were reading, they even have some of the emblems engraved in the floor of that building up there. So that has got Chris and I curious. We have talked to the owner to see if we can go up and are they still there? Anyway, that building, one of the Khalil buildings was where the original meeting was held. And it was 3 stories, like Chuck told before. They had the meetings on the 3rd floor, and then the 2nd floor was like a diner, and they must have served dinners and stuff. After that was at about, my dates I'm not real sure. Yeah, 2nd floor. In 1952, the membership saw the need for larger space. They moved upstairs by the north side of the railroad street, which is over the First State Insurance. Okay, then after that, in 1970, they purchased the lodge, or they purchased the Bader property on US 34. It's where Wes Whitaker's salvage area is, and that building is actually still there. Let's see. If you go behind his office, that building is still there, we found out. But this is the building, and it was dedicated in 1974. It's on Route 34 behind or right where the Whitaker salvage is.
Wasn't that a church before they bought it?
Yes, it was. It was a different church. You know the name, right?
Baptist.
Church was next door.
Spiritual.
Wasn't the church next
The
door?
Baptist church was next door. We had a hard time figuring this out, but with the Verl's help, we figured out. That one was the Spiritual Church of Friendship, and it was run by Mr. Bader's wife, Victoria Resnick. And he built that, I think, for her. And on one side was actually apartments where Carl Bader and his wife lived. And the other one was the Masonic Temple, meeting place. Then after that they came and started meeting, you said, over...
Above the Legion.
Above the Legion?
That's where we
Yeah,
we
I
were
think
last.
over Pratt's Hardware and the Legion at first. And then the Legion became their final.
Yeah.
Up until the end of it in 2005.
Why did they move from there, Bill?
What, from the Legion?
No, yeah, from the.
Oh, from here?
Yeah.
Well, we kept having company there in the front of the lodge. Wes had all his parking stuff there. Then the building was getting bad.
Oh, okay.
I guess that Mr. Bader made his own blocks, and he didn't put much Portland cement in there, and the walls were caving in, and Chuck Howie, the roof was, the walls were blowing out, and he put an I-beam in there and a big rod and tied it all together to hold it together. So, I mean, it was getting to be pretty expensive to maintain,
Yeah, okay.
so we let Wes
I
have it.
remember when it was out there.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody remembers Walt Whitman, but he was the one that donated the money to build that. So that's about the part of where the meetings were held. You might want to tell when it left and where you merged with Leland. You might want to tell that.
2005, we merged with Leland, and that's when we paid life memberships for all the members that were in the lodge, and that was the end of it.
How many members were there then?
About 22. But, well, there was more than that, because if you went through and were a worshipful master, you got a life membership after that then too. So there's more than 22. This was just the ones that hadn't been worshipful master at the time.
Anna, maybe read the names underneath that picture.
In 1855, they had, that was their 100 year in Earlville anniversary. And many people came, these were past worshipful masters of the lodge. And if you want to, it was Harry Lee, Dale Hartman, Walter Whitman, this is the back row, Harold Gray, Harlow Miller, James Heaton, George Gould, Ray Boozle, Bert Mead, Chris Swenson, he came all the way from California to be here, I know, Clyde Aitken, Dr. E.A. Trayson, Gus Mead, and Mervyn Swenson. They were all past leaders of the, yeah. And now they're here some more. Chuck couldn't figure out why they didn't have their aprons on, so I'm figuring it's because of they were members that came from different places to be together.
No.
And this was another group of them that came. It's Stanley Pointer, Alfred Clapp, this is back row, Milton Swanson, Walt Whitman, Everett Hatlin, Harold Gray, Norman Larson, you talked about Norman, right?
Yep.
Yep. Ed Schaefer, Forrest Carter, Sidney Winter, Martin Olson, and Melvin Mitchell. Melvin is Phil's dad, who was, anyway, those all, they all, and there probably were a lot more, but this is pictures we found. The only pictures we have of group pictures of Masons that we've been able to find.
See, this Norman Larson, when he had hair.
It was
Many Masonic
1955.
miles. Yeah, many
1955.
Masonic miles with Norman Larson.
It's,
I'll tell you this little story about Harold Gray. In the second section of the third degree, there's a part that's called the wayfaring man, and there's a certain way you have to do this. Well, Harold had his own way. It didn't make any difference what the Grand Lodge said. It was Harold's way.
Change him.
Well, we had Sanders Club one night, and he belonged down in Waltham.
Glenn Ford.
Glenn Ford. He said, I'm going to teach him how to do that wayfaring man's deal. So he took him by the arm and he led him around. He said, now you do this, and you do this, and you do this, and you do this. The next third degree, Harold did it the same way as he ever did. And everybody said, well, just forget about it, because you won't change it. Harold was just Harold.
well, I'm gonna.
You got a question?
I'm sorry, I was gonna ask. That's
What are the, I'm gonna say poles?
Rods?
Rods.
Rods on
Okay,
either
well,
side?
the two deacons, they have, here's the junior deacon, no, this is the junior deacon. They are the guys on, the senior deacon is on to the right of the worshipful master and the east. Some lodges, we had a fellow join us in Pennsylvania, and he said in Pennsylvania they do not communicate by voice in their lodges. If the worshipful master has something to say and he wants to say it to the guy at the other end of the lodge, he tells the senior deacon, and he goes and tells him this message. Then if it has to pass on to the junior warden, the junior deacon who sits beside the senior warden in the west takes it over to them. There's not any word spoken during the meeting. Now this is Pennsylvania. Now, He hasn't been back to Lodge for a long time, but I'd like to pick his brain a lot more, because he did a lot of things different than we do in Illinois.
But, and then, oh, cripes.
Oh, gosh.
Let me take that.
And these are the stewards' rods. We talked about their jewels. These are the horn of plenty. That's the rising sun and the setting sun. Some of these things, you can come up here and look on this.
I'll tell you what, I'm gonna say thank you to Chuck and Mark and Bill for their informing us about the Masons thing. And this is the Earlville table of the items we have. This is Mason that Chuck brought. Why don't we just kind of close the meeting actually right now, and the presentation part of it, and you come up and look, and if you have questions, I'm sure that they all three will be glad to help answer any of them. So anyway, again, thank you three, and you too, Jim, for joining us. We sure appreciate it.